broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to get started very shortly. I want to just let everyone know that this webinar will be recorded. It will be posted on the NIEER and CEELO websites within the next few days, and we'll send that link out when it's ready. So to begin, just a few logistics. I'm Allison Freeman-Krause from NIEER. I coordinate the yearbook. Most of you know me well from that role. I apologize for the constant emails about submitting the yearbook survey. In terms of the webinar, we've muted all attendee lines. You can enter any questions or comments in either the question box at the bottom of the interface. And as I just mentioned, the webinar will be recorded. If you have any technical issues, please contact Michelle Horowitz. Her contact information is on the screen, or you can enter any technical issues in the chat box and she will monitor them and get back to you. So our agenda for today is Steve Barnett, the director of NIEER, will walk through the new benchmarks that NIEER introduced in the 2016 State of Preschool Yearbook. Then we'll hear from the experiences of 3 exemplar states and how they've managed to meet these benchmarks already. This will be Alabama, Michigan, and New Mexico. And then we'll hear from CEELO about how CEELO can support states to meet these benchmarks. And then we left some time at the end for some question and answers where we hope you'll take advantage of having these 3 exemplar states on the webinar to learn from their experiences. So I will turn this over to Steve.
Hi everyone, this is Steve. First, I just want to thank you all for joining the webinar today. What we're doing is the first major change in the State of Preschool Yearbook in the basically a decade and a half, and the first part of a larger change. This change is really in response to 2 things. One is we think accumulating evidence that indicates the importance of process quality, and in particular policies that support process and implementation more directly and not just program standards for structure and inputs. And also the fact that state pre-K programs have been getting better, and we want to keep pace with that. There's not a whole lot of point in keep track of things if the bar's set so low that everybody always meets it. I anticipate that as we move forward in the future, we're going to continue to change the State of Preschool Yearbook, and that one of those changes will be an increased effort to directly to include direct measures of program quality and performance. But we're a ways from being able to do that. We will keep you posted. For right now, we're going to focus on the changes that we've already introduced as tentative changes and that will be permanent going forward. The slide that you see now lists the 10 benchmarks for quality standards and highlights the 4 that we've changed. So the first of these is comprehensive early learning standards. We've enhanced these. The second is a new standard on curriculum implementation supports from states. The third is enhanced supports for professional development, staff in service. And the last is moving from monitoring to a continuous improvement perspective. And so you could also say that benchmark's been enhanced. In order to add a new benchmark, we've dropped one. That's the requirement that programs provide at least one meal. Our rationale for dropping that is that it's not really a very good indicator of policy about nutrition. Not that nutrition isn't important, it is, but it's not a very good indicator of that. It's mostly an indicator of whether programs are half day or full day. And we saw no change in that over 15 years either. So it wasn't a very effective measure.
Next slide.
Yeah. So just to give you a preview of where we stand now with the 4 new benchmarks, this map shows you in green the states that meet all 4 of the new or enhanced quality standards benchmarks. And you can see that our exemplar states today are states that do that. States that are in gold meet 3 out of 4. The light yellow is 2 out of 3, and the states that have been coded red are those that don't meet any of the 4 or meet only 1. So this is just a way of showing you where we think your state stands currently in terms of the 4 new benchmarks, and that you can see the vast majority of states are going to have some work to do to meet all 4. So let's start with early learning and development standards. Currently, 46 programs out of the 60-something meet all of them. Under the old standard, virtually every program, 59, met the early learning and development standards benchmark. We've strengthened this in 3 ways. Previously, basically your standards had to be comprehensive. We've raised the bar to say, well, standards ought to be aligned. If you have standards for older kids, if you have standards, early learning standards for younger kids, that your standards for preschoolers ought to be aligned with those. They also ought to be aligned horizontally. That is, if you're requiring an assessment of your preschool kids, assessments at kindergarten entry, those assessments ought to be aligned with your comprehensive early learning and development standards. In addition, it's not enough to just have them and put them out there. If programs are really going to implement the standards, they need some support. And there are a variety of ways states can do that. You can provide resources on your website. You can provide professional development. We're not specific about any particular way that states need to support early learning and development standards, only that they need to provide some support. And then finally, we've been more specific that the comprehensive early learning and development standards ought to be culturally sensitive, supportive of children from dual language backgrounds, and there ought to be some attention to that in comprehensive early learning and development standards. The professional development benchmark is met by many fewer programs, right? Just 7 currently. That's down from 49. So this really is a big change. Previously, the benchmark essentially was 15 hours per year of professional development for lead teachers. As you all recognize, preschool programs depend on team teaching. The vast majority of classrooms have lead and assistant teachers. It's important that the assistant teacher get professional development, not just the lead teacher. In addition, we've pushed, based on the research, this definition of professional development to be about effective professional development. So in addition, we're requiring that states have a provision that professional development plans have to exist, right? So it's not just that teachers get some kind of professional development, but that they have a plan for individualized professional development. And we're also requiring that professional development be teacher or classroom specific, right? So we know that individualized professional development that's based on what each teacher, what each staff person classroom actually does is much more effective than generic make it and take it professional development. And so we're looking to focus on the kind of professional development that research tells us is effective. The continuous quality improvement system benchmark moves us away from a monitoring perspective to a quality improvement perspective. I think of this as moving away from a compliance orientation to a kind of GPS orientation. It's not about simply being the police and making sure, trying to essentially make sure that people comply with policy, but providing supports that ensure that programs can get better. This is very much aligned with the professional development benchmark. It's currently met by 22 programs, which again is a big drop from the number that met the old compliance monitoring benchmark. How has it changed? Well, before the requirement was site visits at least once every 5 years. Now we're saying each classroom ought to receive a structured observation of some kind at least annually, that observation ought to be conducted using a valid and reliable observation measure, and that the information from that needs to get fed back to the classroom to improve practice. Again, this is based on a solid body of research that's pointing us to this is what we know makes for effective improvement of the quality that kids actually receive day to day. Now, finally, our new benchmark supports for curriculum implementation. Again, this is also research derived. It is entirely new. Despite the fact that it's new, it is met by 47 programs currently. And I think that's an indication that to a large extent, the field is already on top of this. It's a recognition first that curriculum is important. But second, that if we're going to get curriculum right, states need to support that happening. And this really has two parts. First, that states support curriculum selection. Now, that doesn't mean that they tell every district, every provider what curriculum is required. That certainly would be one way to support curriculum selection, but it's not the only. It could be that your state provides guidance on how do you select and affect evidence-based curriculum. You don't tell them which one, but you give them some guidance on how to identify an evidence-based curriculum or curricula if they use more than one. It could be providing a list of approved or recommended curricula, so long as that list is not, if it's a list of 22 curricula, some of which are evidence-based and some of which are known to be ineffective, that's not going to meet the standard, right? It has to be a list that really is an effective list of evidence-based curricula that helps to guide their selection. It could be requiring the adoption of a specific, that is a list that you have to choose from. And it could be requiring that their curricula be chosen to be aligned with the early learning and development standards, which of course makes sense. And we would hope that any guidance with respect to curricula guides providers to align to pick curricula that are in fact aligned. Don't leave gaping holes that, in terms of learning and development that are not addressed by curricula, for example, or we want to avoid them adopting curricula that are at odds with the early learning and development standards. Beyond this guidance, we think that states also need to provide some supports for implementation, right? So simply getting providers, districts to adopt a sound curriculum doesn't ensure that they do well at implementing it. So examples of support for curriculum implementation include providing or sponsoring professional development, training on curriculum, on implementation of specific curricula, offering technical assistance on how you get your implementation of curriculum right. Could be supporting the purchase of services from curricular developers and trainers to help programs with implementation. So this could be just more generally funding that supports curriculum implementation, again, probably in the form of professional development and training.
So thank you, Steve, for that overview. We're going to turn now to our 3 states and do them in alphabetical order. So we'll start with Alabama. So Tracy, are you there?
Hello, it's Tracy.
Okay, great. We can hear you. So go ahead and tell us about how Alabama has, gone and implemented policies and practice to be able to meet these different benchmarks that Steve has just outlined for us. And you've got about 3 minutes. I'll let you know when the time is running out.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have currently in the field, we have coaches who do professional development on site. I'm just going to try to give you a little background knowledge. We also have monitors who work on grant compliance. And so part of our coaching model, I have some slides if you let me screen share.
Sure. Let me, here we go.
Oh, do you see them?
No, but.
Okay, wait, I see something it's telling me to do. You see it now? Yes.
Here we go. Great.
Okay. Good. Okay, so I'll just kind of give you a little background knowledge and I'll just zoom through these. Well, if I can, okay. So this year our state is broken up into regions, and each region has a regional director. We are in all 67 counties. We have 91 full and part-time. We have a large staff of part-time that are retired early childhood principals or early childhood college professors. Our grants are competitive. We also have a preschool development grant. Currently, we have 16,884 students. So we have diverse delivery, and you can see that we are in all sectors. We have a coaching model that was written by our department about 3 years ago as we were implementing coaching, because we looked at different models and thought we would take the best of all of those and tailor it to what Alabama does. And so when we began looking at the standards, the new NIEER standards, we knew that our professional development plan really went right there where that consensus and action part is of our coaching model. And so during that time, a coach visits a classroom once a month at least, and she's doing a learning environment checklist, or she is performing a class assessment. And each year a teacher is received a class assessment. And at that focused observation, then the teacher and the coach sit down and they come up with a professional development plan. They set goals, the teacher is involved, the coach is involved, and when we're training our coaches, we're training them to have a plan before they walk in with that coach. And so they come up with statements like the coach will, the teacher will. And so that's documented in our database. Our coaching model is a tiered model, and it's tiered because we noticed that we had teachers that didn't need as much support, but with an increase every year of around 200 programs, we know we have new teachers that sometimes need a visit every week. And so I have my team here. I don't know if anybody wanted to add something to that. No? Okay. There you go. So you see that each one of those tiers receives a class assessment. Each one of them are also involved in teaching strategies goals. And if I move ahead here, I'll move back. Each one of those are involved in teaching strategies goals, and all of those are used to develop the professional development plan for the year. Our professional development is usually on site. However, we do have statewide professional development. We have a pre-K conference, and they have some parts of their requirements are local professional development hours. So we did a survey because we're constantly wanting to improve our coaching model. And one of the things we learned from our teachers, this is last year, is that our 80% of the teachers agreed that coaching was an effective way to support their use of evidence-based teaching practices. And we also learned that the majority of the focus, as you can see, was on social emotional development. That was a high need in our state last year, and so we've developed our statewide professional development around that need. And usefulness of professional development, 85% of those teachers felt like their professional development plan was useful in supporting evidence-based teaching practices. And here's the frequency of our coaching visits. Our monitors visit classrooms to make sure there's grant compliance. And then our coaches will go in and do coaching based on those professional development needs. Also, sometimes the monitor might notice that they do not have, one of our grant requirements would be to have an hour and a half of free play or choice time. And if they don't, the coach would go in after the monitor has observed this and coach that teacher into working on their schedule or their transition times or other things. So not just grant compliance, but program compliance for our state fund. This is what is involved in our coaches' toolbox when we train our coaches. They pull these resources. Everyone receives a class assessment, and everyone receives a deck of P, which is an environmental checklist. But based on the need of that teacher, the coach has she can professionally decide which tool that she uses on which visit, and based on the individual professional development goal that the teacher has set. So our curriculum support, years ago we did vertically align it with our K-3 friends over at the State Department of Ed. They actually were involved in our writing our Alabama Developmental Early Learning Standards, that also include those for special ed. They are horizontally aligned with our teaching strategies goals, and many people from our department, or not many, 2 people from our department sat on the ESSA committee for early learning, so we know that it will be aligned with the NIEER. One of the things we noticed a few years ago is that we needed support for dual language learners, and so we teamed up with one of our state universities, and they have a grant called the Impact Grant that provides online professional development for those teachers that are working with dual language learners. It also provides scholarships for those teachers to go back and get their master's in ELL. So in order to maintain quality, we did increase our professional development hours, and we were talking before the call that if we included our coaching hours, it would be a lot more than the 30 for lead teachers and 20 for auxiliary teachers. We also had to go back and make sure that our auxiliary teachers, we call them auxiliary, but assistant teachers, our assistant teachers were involved in the professional development plan. And so 2 years ago, we began tweaking our coaching model to include coaching lead and assistant teachers, and being sure that they have a professional development plan documented in our database. So we also have, if you do not complete this is in our guidelines, it is our policy that our programs agree to follow whenever they are funded through our department, that you are fined if you do not complete your professional development hours. And I think that's all.
Great. Do you have anything to add? Or otherwise, we will switch over and move on to Michigan. Okay, Richard, whenever you're ready, and I'll go through your slides, so just let me know when to go to the next one.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm Richard Lauer. I'm Director of Preschool and Out-of-School Time Learning at the Michigan Department of Education, and oversee Michigan's Great Start Readiness Program, the state publicly funded pre-K for 4-year-olds at risk for educational deficits. So next slide. I wanted to set the stage a little bit as well for Michigan, and to let you know generally what the size and scope is. In Michigan, our funding for state pre-K for 4-year-olds is at about $243 million, and we are this past year, 16-17, we served 38,371 children in a variety of program options and in a variety of settings, as we also actually promote a mixed delivery system of public schools, charter schools, and community-based organizations. I do want to acknowledge in Michigan, we have multiple sets of authority over the state preschool program, and that does have an impact on quality. The Michigan State Board of Education, state superintendent have independent authority through the Michigan Constitution, and they really drive the aspect of putting out policy statements, guidance, and regulation in the form of grant criteria. So as the state legislature and governor give out funding, and as you see in point 2, they have authority over funding. The State Board of Education can put additional criteria on those funds when we pass them through the State Department to our local providers. The GSRP is authorized actually within a budget bill within the state of Michigan, not a piece of separate law. And so there are 2 budgets that fund education. GSRP is within the State School Aid Act. And not only does it establish funding levels, it does establish aspects of the program as well that have implications for policy. One of the caveats I would say, in Michigan is that we run an annual budget process, and therefore the state preschool program is under scrutiny on an annual basis by the legislature for continued quality as well as achieving child and program outcomes. So there are pros and cons to that, I will say. Um, in 2012-13, one of the main things that helped us achieve greater quality recognition and see the needle move was that we actually changed the structure. The legislature, the community of preschool providers worked collaboratively to change the administrative structure of GSRP from local public school districts, charter schools, and community-based organizations that were over 500 in number that provided GSRP to 56 intermediate school districts for the administration of the program. Now, those 56 do subcontract, we call them subrecipients, out to the LEAs, PSAs, and CBOs. That number quite a few. We still have 356 school districts, 77 public school academies, and 228 CBOs that provide the program. However, we have the intermediate school district administration help us be able to ensure greater levels of fidelity of implementation to impact quality. Now, back before this occurred, Michigan was meeting 7 of the 10 benchmarks. As we move to a more intermediate regional administrative level where we can focus better on monitoring and quality, we rose to 9 out of 10 benchmarks, and I have my years off, I'm sorry, in the 2016 yearbook. But as it was noted earlier on the slides, Michigan actually meets 10 out of the 10 benchmarks, and that we just had a miscommunication on our requirements. So when the 16 yearbook was released, it was released with 9 out of 10 being noted. But we intend to ensure that our communication is very clear and it's acknowledged that we do meet 10 out of 10 benchmarks. The other thing that is really, the NIEER yearbook is helping Michigan continue to impact quality of our program, is that because of the prominence and respect of the NIEER yearbook benchmarks and relative standing of those states, Michigan's governor has asked that we establish a metric for our state preschool program related to maintaining and continuing to maintain and enhance our benchmark attainment, as well as our standing within the individual aspects of access and funding. So that's exciting that the governor recognizes the importance of the benchmarks as a driver for quality and established a metric for us to continue to report to him on. And it's also related to the fact that Michigan established a top 10 in 10 vision for Michigan becoming a top 10 state in education in the next 10 years. And as that relates to the NIEER benchmarks, an important piece is that one of the top 10 strategies is having access for all 4-year-olds to a high quality publicly funded program by 2020, and then for all 3-year-olds by 2025. So participating in this national yearbook and continuing to use the benchmarks as a beacon of quality to guide us has helped us drive policy and funding at the state level. Next slide. So I just wanted to touch on the 4 benchmarks specifically, and I coupled them 2 and 2. The early learning development standards and supports curriculum are really, these are integrated aspects from us. We believe in Michigan that the early learning development standards should drive every aspect of our pre-K model, including curriculum and child assessment choice and implementation. And Michigan does establish a list against the standards, and then local providers in the intermediate school district work together to choose which one. And currently there's 2 predominant ones in Michigan being used, and that being creative curriculum and the high scope curriculum. And then because we promote cohesion and alignment between screeners, assessments, curricula, and so forth, they also use Teaching Strategies Gold as the assessment for when they're using creative curriculum, or they use HighScope's core advantage when they utilize the HighScope curriculum as the predominant model. We do, even though we live in a budget bill, we have very specific language authorizing, as I put in there, an age-appropriate educational curriculum that is in compliance with the early childhood standards of quality that are adopted by our state board. So it really shows how these connect between the legislative branch and the education department under the state constitution. I highlighted an aspect because for this new year, this normally in the past there was a period after adopted by the state board. This year, with some special interest trying to promote additional curricula to be options, the last part that I have italicized was added to the legislation for this year, that we're in now. So I make the point that when talking about quality and fidelity of a model, especially when we have a model that does prove outcomes both academically as well as holistically for the child, holding the line on comprehensive alignment to the standards absolutely is critical in our minds to continued success for child outcomes and quality. Our early learning development standards are comprehensive across the whole child. They are inclusive of NIEER's identified 5 core ones. We did last update it in 2013 to include some specific language about cultural aspects as well as dual language learners and technology. We all along from the get-go ensure that our standards have been vertically and horizontally aligned, knowing that those up the chain in grades look back for when they default. If there's an issue, they always point backwards to where the issues happen before them. So if our approach was always to ensure vertical alignment so that they could not easily just scapegoat early childhood as a problem for potential performance in the future. Most importantly, that I'm talking about here is that we require teaching staff and our coaches, which we've put into place over the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years specifically, are fully trained, ideally by the toolmaker or a certified trainer from the publisher, in all of the aspects of standards, curriculum, screeners, and assessment. Next slide. And so
Richard, just about 2 more minutes.
Okay.
Through. Okay, thank you.
So then the next 2 area of benchmarks on professional development and continuous quality improvement, again, these are integrated with the other aspects. So professional development, we require all of our providers to be licensed, regardless of setting. And so licensing requirements, we ensure that we raise the bar over time, and we've gotten to the point of the 16 hours per year. And we require it for all members of the teaching team, so as well as for the program directors, as well as for the on-site administrators. And this is where we will continue to strengthen our communication because individual professional development plans are required for all those individuals as it relates to licensing. The coaches, we call them early childhood specialists in Michigan, are required to be assigned to each classroom teaching team. On the screen, you'll see our basic requirements for that position. But importantly, those early childhood specialists visit each classroom at least monthly during the program year. They include time to coach the teaching teams, to model strategies, observe and provide immediate feedback. They attend home visits and conferences. They work with the teaching teams to achieve the individualized desired support to move the individual teacher along their professional development continuum. That is really, we see the ECS as the catalyst of quality in those programs. Next slide. So my takeaways, I would say in Michigan here is that I feel like we have been somewhat proactive in continuous quality improvement because we've been really informed by our longitudinal research studies and some of our own self-assessment over the years. So we're pretty well prepared for the new standards, whether they be the old ones that continue on or the brand new ones. But we still see them as being the beacon for giving us direction. There have been many changes over the last several years with the structure, and that requires us to establish some supports for providers already, and some of those supports are now being recognized within those new standard benchmarks. So that's exciting for Michigan. We continue at the State Department to establish and make guidance available. We provide resources for implementation of the model. Ultimately, our funding and what we allow the funding to be used for impacts quality from our point of view, and that impacts the standards. And then finally, thinking about the State Department does the work for alignment to the early learning standards, so that it's not a burden on the providers to make that determination. And so we developed a process with a rubric for assessing not only existing curricula that are allowed, but also for any new emerging ones on the market. Ultimately, the comprehensiveness of the curricula is most important because we want to support the whole child development. I believe, you know, what has been the impact, we maintain a pretty high level score on our program quality tool called the Program Quality Assessment because of all of these continuous quality improvement efforts. And I listed them on the slide for you to see. But ultimately, in this era of child outcomes mattering the most within the public policy sphere, I believe in Michigan, we must keep being proactive and forward thinking on every aspect of our model, and that comprehensive early learning development standards set the bar for quality, and adherence to them fully is necessary to continue to maintain our gains and continue to make the field successful in Michigan. So that's how we tell our story about the NIEER Yearbook and its role in the state preschool program and ensuring that we achieve quality and maintain it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. Now we will move on to Brenda and Monica in New Mexico.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, this is Brenda Koval. I'm the pre-K program manager for the programs that are in the public schools, and I work for the public education department. Good morning, or good afternoon, I apologize, and I am Monica Archuleta, and I'm the pre-K program manager over at our Children, Youth, and Families department, and we fund pre-K programs that are in our private child care programs, as well as universities, tribal programs, and some municipality programs. New Mexico Pre-K was established in the 2005-2006 school year, and in our initial legislation, it was specified that this would be a program operated by the two agencies, but working in close collaboration. And this legislation and the Pre-K Act of 2005 put the responsibility for developing program standards to the two agencies. And so over the years of Pre-K, we've worked very closely to have joint program standards. And these program standards drive the quality in our program. In addition, private providers that are funded, nonprofits funded by CYSD, have a scope of work. Programs in the public school, the superintendent is required to sign assurances, which again lists those quality standards that must be adhered to by the program. It's been since the beginning of Brenda mentioned, 2005, 2006, in the original pre-K program standards, where we wrote in so many of these quality components, professional development being one of them. We've also had a consultation system in place since the beginning. So every funded New Mexico pre-K classroom received consultation support monthly or every 3 weeks by one consistent individual who guided them through not just being able to meet so many of our standards, but also through an ongoing quality improvement process, a continuous quality improvement process as well. Our policies that guide our pre-K programs have mirrored or exceeded the NIEER benchmarks from the beginning. One area that New Mexico does not meet, and we're working on very diligently, is the education of our private providers. We're a very diverse state. We're a very rural state. And we're seeing great improvement in that area and working toward making sure that all of our programs do have a degree. Public school programs are required to have a teaching license in early childhood. Our state has separate licensure, not an endorsement, and our educational assistants to have an AA degree. Through our Children, Youth, and Families Department in our private programs funded through our department, those teachers are required to have and maintain an ongoing professional development plan to show growth working toward the educational requirement, being an AA for our educational assistants in early childhood education, or a BA for our lead teachers in early childhood education, eventually leading to licensure. So that is something that we work with our teachers on an ongoing basis. As I think everybody can relate to, it is a challenge given the turnover in our field. But it has proven, like Brenda mentioned, we've seen great improvements in our state and within our classrooms as well, based on this one standard and this one requirement, which is not only in our pre-K standard or part of a contractual requirement, but it's also a large piece in our tiered quality rating and improvement system as well, called FOCUS. New Mexico was the recipient of one of the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grants. And in this grant, we committed that we would have a quality rating and improvement system across what we call our system of systems of early childhood programs, beginning with home visiting and our family infant toddler programs for infants and toddlers with delays and disabilities. Through our public school preschool programs, including those funded by Title I and by IDEA and state special education dollars, as well as New Mexico pre-K in both agencies and our child care programs. So the NIEER benchmarks are reflected throughout our FOCUS quality rating and improvement system. And through Race to the Top, we have revised the system of the FOCUS documents to further reflect quality improvement. Our early learning standards are called the New Mexico Early Learning Guidelines. They are comprehensive. They address 7 domains of development. They are both horizontally and vertically aligned. They start with infant toddler, and the latest iteration goes through first grade. Now, we're not saying that our first grade classrooms are actively using the early learning guidelines. But what we are saying is that our assessment for both preschool and our kindergarten entry assessment called the Kindergarten Observation Tool are directly based on the New Mexico Early Learning Guidelines. So for kindergarten, it was necessary to expand those, the indicators and the rubrics up to first grade because we want to be able to show growth for those children, as well as the need to have indicators for infants and toddlers. We finished the preschool, kindergarten, first grade revision in 2017, and we're finalizing a revision of the infant toddler standards right now. We do offer extensive support for curriculum implementation and, you know, have as a part of New Mexico Pre-K from the beginning. Monica mentioned our coaching consultation model. We also provide guidance to school districts and providers that want to adopt a new curriculum. They need to pass that by their state monitor before they're able to adopt, and then we provide follow-up support. But every curriculum that is adopted must align with the New Mexico Early Learning Guidelines and with a policy paper called the Developmental Interaction Approach, which is the overarching approach for curriculum in early childhood programs in New Mexico. Thank you. Our in-service requirements are quite extensive. Monica and I were adding up some of the hours this morning, and we saw that, you know, we knew that we definitely exceeded, but with the implementation of focus in our state-funded preschool program, we're seeing that we've added a number of additional components. And some of the components that have been added, particularly in our public schools, are the pyramid social emotional training, and that also is available to our private providers. It is a required part of having a New Mexico Pre-K grant and part of our focus quality rating and improvement system for all programs in the public schools. And our pyramid training is 18 hours. So you can see that when we start adding all these things together, we came up with a huge number of hours. We do also require that our educational assistants be trained alongside the teachers. And that has been something that has been in place from the beginning. Again, as I mentioned, we're a very rural state. We're a state with some economic challenges. And so we've been engaged in growing our own teachers through using Teach Scholarship to allow our educational assistants to seek first their AA degree and then to go on to their BA degree. We have one program in the public schools this year that will have 4 educational assistants graduate in May with their degree and will be then able to seek teacher licensure. And so we're really happy to see that by the use of Teach Scholarship, and as Monica mentioned, requiring a minimum number of college hours to be completed by assistants or teachers that do not meet the licensure requirement has propelled us forward.
I just want to go back and echo again, Alabama, thank you for mentioning. New Mexico has also seen an increased statewide need for social emotional support and additional training for our teachers. That's another component that we are currently building on and enhancing in our pre-K program standards is based on the need for social emotional support and training, and also for our dual language learners. We've also seen an increase, I think just an increased need to train
our teachers, support families and children as well.
I'm going to jump in real quickly. For the sake of time, if you can sort of wrap everything up in the next minute or so, that would be great.
Yes, and the last thing, the continuous quality improvement system, this is part of our focus and has been part of New Mexico pre-K since the beginning. So it was there was not a need for change for us in that area. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and thank you to our 3 states. Lori, if you want to jump on and talk briefly about how CEELO can help states move towards meeting the NIEER benchmark.
Sure. Thank you so much to the states. I think they highlighted very thoughtful, very intensive approaches to improving quality. I know you each would probably like to have them come to your state and visit with you and, impart the lessons learned. And I think that's one of the ways CEELO can help you is to help you assess what you'd like to work on to improve, put a plan in that might take, some amount of time and research, use the data we have access to both at NIEER and through our other work to come up with a kind of a systemic improvement plan. I will let you know that we are also revising our cost of preschool quality calculator to help you determine what are the costs associated with meeting the new benchmarks. Some are really already built in there, but others are incremental costs around curriculum implementation and fidelity perhaps, or around professional development, as I think Brenda spoke about, doing that in a very intentional way. And finally, given the time, and I want to leave it open for other questions, I'm going to put in the chat box, or you have right there actually, CEELO.org, but just send a note to info@CEELO.org if you'd like us to develop a technical assistance plan to assist you, to connect you with these states or others that might provide you with some insight and guidance and real tools. Or if you'd like to join a small learning community of a few states who want to work on this intentionally over the course of the next year or two. So I'll leave it at that, given that there's probably other questions or other opportunities, but we wanted to be sure you know that while we really applaud the thoughtful look at how we increase quality and what is necessary to address both process and structural quality, we want you to know that you have support and have assistance from us, and we are ready to help you meet those goals for children and families. If anybody has any questions for me or anybody else, please go ahead and put them in the chat box now.
Great, thank you, Lori. So we are almost out of time, but I think we can stay on for a few more minutes if anyone has questions. As Lori said, you can enter your questions in the question box. And if we don't get to your questions, you can email them to my email address. I'll leave it right here. And we will address them and send them out to other states as well. We think they can inform the answers. So one question that we just got about is whether there's a quick one-pager on the benchmarks. I think right now the documents we have are these slides, which will be posted and shared. There's information in last year's yearbook, and we can work on developing something that we will share in the next week or so. We also received a question about examples of reliable and valid classroom observations. So Steve, I don't know if you want to take that one or if any of our states want to jump in on that.
Yeah, so I think everyone knows the class, the Eckers, our Eckers 3, there are others that are curriculum specific. There are other even newer instruments than the class. For example, there's a new one called the STEW, Shared Sustained Thinking and Emotional Well-Being. There is an Eckers-E that focuses on content as well as, so it focuses on the classroom environment support for language and literacy, for math and science, etc. And some of those are available at relatively low cost through places, you can buy them on Amazon. You do have to get training, but the cost of some of the newer instruments is considerably lower than the costs of some of those that we've been using for a long time. And they also have good evidence that they're in fact predictive of long-term gains for kids. We're actually working toward providing a brief for the field on just that in the not too distant future.
Great, thank you. Another question we had, and this one is for Michigan, if you could share which screeners you're using in your program.
Sure. Just 1 second.
Go ahead, Richard. Are you there? Are you muted? Hello?
Okay, I'm here. Sorry about that.
Go ahead. So the question was about what screeners you're using in your program.
Okay, in terms of screeners, the commonly used ones are Ages and Stages, the Battelle Developmental Inventory, the Brigance Early Childhood Screens 3, the Developmental Indicators for the Assessment of Learning, and then the Early Screening Inventory Revised. I would say the first three, the ASQ, the Battelle, and the Brigance, are probably the more prevalent ones. We do promote a whole child or comprehensive screener, and those tend to be utilized because they're also ones that can easily be utilized in preschool special education, the IDEA for infants and toddlers, and so with the alignment vertically, that is one, those three tend to be the most utilized.
Great, thank you. And one more question. Somebody asked if for the states that are implementing coaching, is there a formal training that your coaches go through before working with teachers, or a common set of coaching competencies that your coaches must meet in order to coach teachers? So I'll open that up to any, Alabama, New Mexico, or Michigan.
For New Mexico, we do have a consultation guide that has been developed, and there's also specific training provided to those coaches or consultants.
In Alabama, we have the requirements are you have to have a master's in early childhood or child development, but we've begun writing the competencies, and we're doing that in partnership with First Five, our infant and early childhood mental health model that the whole state has started with different departments, and it involves our reflective coaching and reflective supervision. And we also have lots of trainings as well, and a lot of it's coaching on class.
And in Michigan, we do provide some trainings in coaching models. However, we are also requiring, most importantly, I think, besides the master's degree individual, the 5 or more years relevant job experience in the classroom to understand context. And we require all the coaches to have training in the Early Childhood Standards of Quality, our implementation manual, the child care licensing rules, the actual quality assessment for the classroom, as well as the curriculum, child assessment screening tools. I know that as a Department of Ed, we're trying to ensure the horizontal as well as the vertical alignment aspect of coaching, given that we've been funding literacy coaches in K-3 and other coaching models related to multi-tiered systems of support in the elementary grades. And so we are just starting the conversation about what are those competencies that need to be predeterminants of individuals who take on this role. So in the meantime, those are the things we've put in place while that work continues on.
Great, thank you. And in lieu of time, I'm going to end the webinar now. If there's additional questions, again, feel free to email me and we will get you answers. And I want to just thank our panelists, Tracy, Richard, Brenda, and Monica, and of course, Steve and Lori. We will be sending slides and a recording out in the next day or two, but definitely by Monday. If you don't receive it, feel free again to email me. So we thank you for joining us today and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.